It has been a minute, but new year, same old me. I am Mike Asti, of course, and this is a Mountaineer live chat here on WV Sports Now. Wanted to offer one of these. It has been a minute, so happy holidays in retrospect to all of you. And there's some news to touch on. So, West Virginia has now officially hired a wide receivers coach. They've announced this move that we kind of all have known for a while now. They don't go in the direction of the big names that I've talked about, that many of you talked about, and that many people kind of wanted. They go in another direction. But maybe there's some sense to be made here on why Bilal Marshall is now the wide receivers coach at WVU. And also, we're going to talk about conference play for the Hoops team because I've been saying this team felt different. This team was better, and this team's going to be better and could actually make a run this year into March and through March. But they got to win these conference games to really prove that to many of the doubters. Played well at times, also made a lot of mistakes that we saw from 2022, from before conference play, from before the new year, rear their ugly heads again. And while the loss to Kansas State was New Year's Eve, so that was still in the past year, the Mountaineers have a lot of work to do to pick up victories for 2023 and into conference play and to actually legitimize the ranking they had that they ended 2022 with and have already lost now into the new year. So feel free to chat along. Feel free to ask any questions. Feel free to join the conversation. And I will get things started with my thoughts on the news of the day as I do this. And that is the announcement being official now. Neil Brown commenting on Bilal Marshall as the new wide receivers coach. And I'm going to admit, I was guilty of this too. I mean, I wrote multiple stories on this. I compared the two of them. I was thinking, okay, you know what? Now finally, and I get the program doesn't care about splash hires. And you also got to be operating not just to appease fans. I mean, a lot West Virginia has done on and off the field recently, certainly with the football program, has not appeased the fan base. I've agreed with some moves that Mountaineers may have made. I agreed with Ren Baker. A lot of fans didn't like that move. Other moves, I get why you're upset, to be honest with you. Again, Neil Brown's still there as head coach. I could get even being frustrated with that and wanting to move on. I touched on that I thought the program should have moved on a long time ago. They didn't. Once it got into the season, once it got to the end of the season, once other coaches were hired, they kind of were stuck and they decided to go on with Neil Brown another year, though. But if it's a mess again, he won't be back for 2024. So I haven't always agreed. I've sometimes have agreed, and I just keep it real. But I get wanting maybe a splash higher. I get wanting to finally have the program do something that you, the fans, wanted, and it once again didn't happen. I did talk about Ryan Switzer. I did talk about Stedman Bailey, and it felt like, okay, maybe it's an ancillary move. We're not talking head coach here. We're talking assistant. We're talking a coach that would have several bosses ahead of him. Obviously, they still need to announce an offensive coordinator. You still would have Brown there. You got a new AD there. There's a lot of veteran coaches. Jordan Leslie is still there. That whether they're part of the offense or not, they can kind of teach somebody who hasn't coached a lot before the ropes of here's where you go, here's how you coach, here's how you talk to a kid, etc. Because Stedman Bailey, I know he was a special assistant back in the day under Holgerson. Obviously, a great Mountaineer as a player on the Orange Bowl team, kind of maybe under Tavon Austin as an elite, electrifying receiver. So maybe Austin kind of overshadowed what Stedman Bailey was, but he certainly was great in his day. Had an NFL career that wasn't able to be something because he got shot, so it's not his fault, but never able to seize the day professionally as a player. And then Ryan Switzer was a spark plug in the NFL, had his time with the Steelers, the Browns, couple cups of coffee, also had times where he played really, really well, retired early. People thought maybe that career could have been longer as well, but he had an okay career, did have a professional career, had certain spotty appearances. I covered him actually during his time with the Steelers as well. So it could have been more. He legitimized himself in the NFL, but it wasn't able to be something grandiose by any means. A great player at North Carolina, was a West Virginia high school star that ended up not coming to WVU, was not heavily recruited by the Mountaineers. Some have always criticized the Holgerson era for missing on Switzer, a great player at UNC during his college days. And he returned actually to West Virginia this past summer at the end of camp to help out. And he has been very public, including telling me personally, being out there publicly, he wants to coach. And actually, he's said he has opportunities, and it appears, I'm not going to announce it for him, that he's going to coach. So congrats to him, but it's not going to be a WVU. And Stedman Bailey also wants to do it. Don't know his future, but maybe it'll be in coaching too. Instead, and I said that maybe you go in one of those two directions. I advocated for Switzer because he really wants to. I saw it firsthand. I think he can be a good coach. I know a lot of other people wanted Stedman Bailey. Nothing against Stedman Bailey. That could have been great too. But I just witnessed Switzer more firsthand, and it's been a while for Stedman Bailey actually trying to coach anybody up. And I was on the Switzer train. I'll admit it. Didn't happen though. Bilal Marshall ends up being the guy. So Bilal Marshall, who is he? He is a Mountaineer in a way, not from West Virginia, didn't play at West Virginia. He's from Florida. We'll get to that in a moment, by the way. That might be why he was hired for this job. Played at Purdue, so no Big 12, old Big East, West Virginia, rival, WVU. None of those connections really exist, but was a grad assistant on the Mountaineers staff not long ago. Neil Brown obviously knows him, feels comfortable with him. He may feel comfortable with Brown. Granted, we don't know how long Brown will still be at WVU. Hey, Chad, how you doing? Again, we're talking about Bilal Marshall being hired as wide receivers coach at West Virginia. Not Switzer, not Stedman Bailey. It is Bilal Marshall. I'm going to get to why that makes sense here in a moment, and also we'll talk some hoops here as well. Feel free to ask any questions. Feel free to chat along. Again, wanted to offer one of these Mountaineer live chats. I'm going to try to do these more often in the midst of my shows, my coverage, what we have going on at WVSN, and everything else I do. So not as much time as I would like, but want to engage when I can. It's been a while for a show here on the channel in WV Sports now, because I still was writing, obviously, kept the site alive, but I wanted to take a break with my family as well. But anyway, they bring in Bilal Marshall instead. So he's a player too. So if you want a former player because you're saying, okay, it's wide receiver position, we're not talking head coach here. I do like a former player that's done it before, that can literally show you exactly how it's done to be the guy. Wide receiver coach is often a former player, if not exclusively. Same thing as if you're, teaching the secondary or a linebackers coach. Coordinators a lot of the time are former players, but especially the exact position coach. Quarterbacks coach, usually a former quarterback, okay? Head coach doesn't have to be. We've seen head coaches have success without having to have a playing acumen necessarily, whether it be college or pro. And obviously you got to work your way up somewhere to get to be a head coach. But at the end of the day, when you're in these exact positionary positions right now in this day and age, it's often a former player. So Bilal Marshall's a former player. Played in the CFL. No, it wasn't NFL like Stedman Bailey or Ryan Switzer, but it was CFL, did make some money. But at Purdue, he was the best receiver on his team his senior year. Again, Purdue wasn't winning a natty at that point, but still, he was a solid receiver. He put up similar numbers to some of these guys he's coached. He also coached a pretty deep receiver core at WVU recently. So this past year, Bryce Ford Wheaton's numbers increased a little bit, but not really where you want them to be. And obviously the team dropped a lot of passes. It's going to be a whole new group coming in, whether it be Rodney Gallagher and company and Trayvon Ray as young recruited receivers, or whether it be any of these guys in the portal. They did bring Poke in, and they're going to get some others. But right now, it's an open room. They don't really know who's going to be there. Prather gone. Obviously, Wright's been gone now for a while. Reese Smith gone. Sam James draft. Bryce Ford Wheaton draft. Again, see, Donaldson will be back. He can do it as a receiver, or at least as we stand, he's going to be back, but a running back in position. And they do get a tight end who can be a pass catcher, with O'Loughlin going from retirement to gone in the portal to now. It's not sure based on what you're seeing on Twitter, but he's not going to be with West Virginia nonetheless. So you have a coach who's done it before. That could be the edge right there, guys. So Stedman Bailey and Ryan Switzer, they're cool names. I think it would have been cool to give one of them the opportunity. Again, they both really want to do it, and Switzer's really been there, willing to volunteer his time to do it as recent as a few months ago. with this program. So with this coaching staff, not under Holgerson like Stephen Bailey, he's got to know Neil Brown. I don't know whether he had a phone call, whether they did talk, what that conversation was, but there are two reasons why Bilal Marshall was hired to me. And they're both good ones, honestly. I get wanting the splash hire of Switzer or Stephen Bailey. And again, I advocated for Switzer and Bailey too, even. But Bilal Marshall was added on because he's been a wide receivers coach. This program's familiar with him. So I don't love immediately always going within the program for a head coach or an AD. They did go outside of things for an AD. Neil Brown's not a WVU tie guy. He actually was outside, even though obviously that's not really worked out that well to this point. Holgerson was an outside guy. So they've gone outside for big time positions. Sometimes, though, when we're talking, and Graham Harrell was an outside guy as offensive coordinator. We'll see about that position. Sometimes when we're talking about lower level positions, though, you want the staff to be familiar. I don't care where the man's from, but for the staff to be familiar with Bilal Marshall and what he's done, that's a positive. I do think that's a positive, honestly, certainly for this next season. And again, we don't know Brown's future, so maybe who knows beyond that. But he's done it recently. He's been a legit wide receivers coach at VMI. Only a year, but owning the room. He was in charge of the meetings. He went in there and did the job. He led in terms of that position, was talking to the coach about recruiting. It was him. He was the boss of the receivers at that school. Okay. He was doing it. The other two haven't been doing it. They have not had that position by any means. We'll see. They've been either volunteering or special assistant, which is basically the same type of thing, really. They have not in any way had a legit coaching job. Nothing against them. They know it. That's their obstacle right now. That is Switzer's obstacle. He knows it. That's the issue. That's the truth. So a big coup for Bilal Marshall in comparison to the others. He's done it recently, knows the staff. And the depth of the receivers was better when he was there. He wasn't receivers coach, but Winston Wright, others, several guys with 30 plus catches, 40 plus catches, 400 plus yards, 500 plus yards. This past season, it was Bryce's numbers, Sam's numbers, and a big dip overall production wise. With Bilal Marshall there, and it's again, not just him doing it. He wasn't the head honcho, but it was a lot of depth with the receivers. And now you need a guy who can coach them up and bring that depth again and teach every last one of them, because it's going to be a myriad of experience, and they're going to rely on probably a lot of youth, certainly lack of experience at WVU. It's pretty much going to be a whole new room, whether it be with transfers or from incoming freshmen. So that's all big. Having a guy who's done it before and has literally been a coach at that position as a wide receivers coach and familiar with the program and the staff, all big. The main reason, though, why I think this man has this job that Ryan Switzer could not bring, that Stedman Bailey could not bring, and I don't care what they've done in terms of their career and resumes, and maybe that would impress some kids. I don't care where they're from, and I know Ryan Switzer being West Virginia native, I get it. I don't care what they did as players, and I know Stedman Bailey did it big at WVU, so you guys are going to like that. And Bilal did it at Purdue. You don't care. Bilal did it in the CFL. You don't care. It's not comparable to the NFL for Bailey or Switzer at the position. I get it. So we're talking about three guys that have played before, so that's big. 4 wide receivers coach, you want a player. I get it. But when you go to Bilal Marshall and what he brings, now I've heard others bring this up, and you really dive in. This is really true. And obviously recruiting is not as important now because of the portal, but you're recruiting in the portal. So recruiting is not just recruiting high school kids. It's also recruiting players in the portal and where they're from, where they were recruited, when they were coming out of high school, etc. All that can still matter. If you recruited somebody out of high school, they go somewhere else, they go in the portal, you still keep in contact with them. Maybe then they will come to your school a year or so in if they're now in the portal. So you're constantly trying to recruit kids. Even if you lose them at first, you could then recruit them later when they're in the portal. And Bilal Marshall might be that recruiter, certainly at that position, if not more than that position, if not offensive stars in general, because there have been obviously a lineage of West Virginia recruiters going down into Florida. Some have had success. Obviously, Noah Devine, that diamond in the rough, really a stud. It was a 5-star kid with high school tape that's like Reggie Bush, for crying out loud, and end up coming to be a Mountaineer. That's a Florida kid. Obviously, Geno Smith, and we're talking about decade plus, but this is the last glory years really for the program. Won an Orange Bowl, who's now obviously having his resurgent season in the NFL as a Pro Bowler, and became an all-time great, a WVU Sports Hall of Famer. The list can go on and on. And they've been going to Florida this year. They've been in Florida the past few years. They put players on the roster from Florida. They're going to Florida, not only just recruiting high school kids, because I know that, again, people are always going to say, well, it's not about high school kids anymore, like with Geno and the others. You get them to come there, and yeah, Geno's there so many years, builds up to an Orange Bowl season. It's not going to happen these days. They're going to get there 1 year and then transfer out, or like what's happened to Mountaineers, or you got to bring in kids from the portal. And they do. They got to do a lot of work in the portal as well, and they're not going to bring in a portal kid as QB, but they're going to do work in the portal. They're sending offers. They literally sent an offer I wrote up just before going on air here. So they are doing that, but they got to do better in the portal for sure. It can't just be all losses and no additions or no good additions. And the addition of last year with JT Daniels clearly didn't work out. So they got to do better in the portal, and they have to work out. They're willing to take risks, but they got to take more of them in the portal, even if not QB. But that all could be aided and helped by Bilal Marshall, because he is the connection from Florida. So if you're seeing offers sent to a lot of kids in Florida or are from Florida, maybe they're from Florida and they've been playing at another school the last several years, because that's happening. That's been happening. That was happening when he was at WVU. And rumors tell you, and what I've heard around the program as well from colleagues and people certainly in the know, but also within the program, and I'm not going to divulge their names, but any of the Florida kids that have been recruited in the last several years, certainly when Bilal Marshall was at WVU, obviously not the VMI year, while the grad assistant can't go in the room and can't be in the living room and at the kitchen table and be the quote-unquote lead recruiter, so it may say that, say, Trickett was the leading recruiter. Like back in the day, it was Doc Holliday was the leading recruiter on all of these kids. It might have said that. Okay, Trickett might have been the leading recruiter, Travis Trickett. But from what many say was Bilal Marshall really leading the way. So he was the one in the DMs. He was the one sending the texts. He was the one building the relationships. He was the one taking him out for a spin around town, taking him out to get a burger, doing whatever. Obviously, I'm assuming not drinking, because it wasn't legal for many of them then. But he was the one courting the kid, hanging out with them, doing what he had to do to lock it up for Trickett and company. So again, talking about Bilal Marshall hired here at West Virginia as the new wide receivers coach, not Switcher, not Stephen Bailey. We'll get to some hoops talk in a moment. Again, Mike Asti at Mike Asti 11, where you can find me on Twitter. Follow. Feel free to chat with me there on a regular basis. I do try to actually engage on Twitter. Also, WV Sports Now for all of our coverage. Hit up WVSportsNow.com, and also our Sports Now properties, certainly covering the Mountaineers, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And subscribe to this YouTube channel, obviously, for notifications when more of these Mountaineer live chats happen, when my show Mic Drop happens, when any of our post-game shows happen, when any of our videos in general happen, for any of the coverage from coaches and players and their thoughts before and after games throughout Mountaineer athletics as well. But again, Bilal Marshall is somebody that obviously has done it. So he's been a coach. Again, can't say that about the other star names, star players, former players, NFL guys. Stephen Bailey, former Mountaineer. Ryan Switzer, West Virginia native. I know, again, I get it. It would have been splashier, and I advocated for it. I would have had a great connection in terms of covering it with Switzer. We have a thing, and I just saw him. I mean, he was down there doing it. I wish the guy well. I hope he gets a coaching job. He's gonna get a coaching job, but I hope it's one that works out for him and that he ascends the ladder. Stedman as well. But Bilal Marshall might actually be the guy that makes sense here. Now, again, I could see if maybe it still feels like a boring move, because you're not going to be able to again, recruiting's not as important, but as I said, recruiting's about the high school kids and the portal. So you're recruiting portal people that have been in college football for a couple of years that are still from Florida. So having the Florida pipeline, which West Virginia has had, but needs to improve on, needs to have that better, needs to keep on doing it and never give it up. Bilal Marshall could help with that. He's been a coach. He's done it before. The others haven't. Those are all positives for him. And then in addition to all of that for Bilal Marshall, if Switzer and Stedman Bailey maybe were pipe dreams, maybe even for me, they were pipe dreams. So if we agree they weren't really ever going to happen here in reality, even if you won it, they weren't going to happen. You're then basically comparing the state of the program at the wide receiver position under the leadership of a wide receivers coach from Tony Washington to Bilal Marshall. Okay, I mean, come on. Tony Washington, a former player, been there a little bit, only been there a year. The receivers, yeah, they're okay. Caden Prather did emerge. He did step up, become more of a name than he was the year earlier. He's now in the portal, though. But there were some positives with him. I liked him. He was a nice guy. But overall, did the receiver room get better? Did Bryce Forweeden take the step that Tony Washington himself in a video on this channel said he was going to get Bryce Forweeden to? No. Were drops an issue? And Neil Brown himself often said that that's a fundamental problem that our coaches need to fix. Was that ever really truly fixed by the coaches? Yeah, I mean, they're not the one dropping the ball. You can blame the kids, obviously. You can't drop passes. They did drop too many critical passes. But are you losing that much going from Tony Washington to Bilal Marshall? I guess that's what I'm saying here. If Switzer and Stedman Bailey were pipe dreams and never going to happen, then here in reality, you're comparing Tony Washington to Bilal Marshall. Tony Washington was fine, but it wasn't winning any individual award as coach of the year here for wide receiver position. The receivers kind of dipped throughout the season. They didn't get better. Well, let's put it to you that way. I wouldn't say Bryce Forweeden and Sam James draft stock is any better than it would have been a year earlier. And I wouldn't say that anyone really made a name for themselves besides Caden Prather on offense in terms of receivers. Reese Smith never got involved like he said he was guaranteed to get involved and was promised he would get involved. Never happened for the kid. I'm not blaming coaches there. I don't know if he fit. But even with Graham Harrell, who ran an offense that seemed to cater to that guy, it didn't happen. So, again, you lose Tony Washington. He goes to Liberty. And, yeah, it sucks to lose somebody to a group of five. I get that. That stings. It's a bad vibe. I get it. But he's also going to be with his friend. So it's not like he's in a situation where he's the lateral move or he just chooses to go to a group of five for nothing. He's going to his friend. And really, from what I've heard as well, the program was fine moving on from Tony Washington. So there kind of was a little bit of, it's kind of like with Jared Deggy before as a transfer QB. Like, we agree we're going to divorce this relationship, go find something else because we're okay with not being together any longer, even though it was only a year with Tony Washington. And then he found the Liberty job. His friend was there, took over for Hugh Freeze, left. So I get it. Again, you want the splash hire, but Bilal Marshall has done it. It's no different or worse than Tony Washington. It's the same, if nothing else. It's two former players that were basically mediocre players that never were able to do it more than college football, really. Certainly could teach them, certainly know how to do it, certainly have been doing it before at a high level in terms of college ball. Are relatively young men, can maybe get into the vibe and the mentality and hang out with these kids and have some fun, and that could be a positive. Tony Washington leaves. The team didn't get better receiver-wise. They bring in Bilal Marshall. We'll see what happens if that can do anything. The kids need to still do it on their own. A position coach can only give you so much. But a position coach in this day and age, if you have one that really can help you recruiting-wise, and now you're not a grad assistant, his name can be on the dotted line there as the lead recruiter. So we'll see how many recruits he actually gets credit for officially now that he has a legit job. But many thought the cricket recruits were Bilal's, basically. So if that's the case, we'll see. It's similar to Tony Washington, though. It's not a dip. It's not like you're losing. I could argue rather having Bilal Marshall than Tony Washington. You have a similar situation in terms of body of work, in terms of coach for a position coach. And then one's a pretty solid recruiter from what we've been hearing, honestly. Certainly with that Florida pipeline, which Tony Washington doesn't bring. I mean, Bilal Marshall brings a Florida pipeline. That's a big plus. So that's a big plus that Stedman Bailey, Ryan Switzer, they weren't going to bring. They've never been recruiting. They don't talk to high school kids. Maybe they do, but again, it's not to the level of Bilal Marshall, who's been a wide receivers coach as recently as last year and was doing it, going on those trips as a grad assistant. So he's in the trenches. The other two were they're doing it on their own, but they're not actually coaches yet. We'll see if they get there. So Bilal Marshall does make some sense when you really dive in. I get not getting the splash guy, but he does make some sense when you really dive in. And if what we're hearing is true about him really being the Florida Pipeline recruiter, we'll see. And then we'll see if that comes true with that pipeline. Now to transition here, and again, any questions, comments, anything? I do see Chad and a few others here. A lot of just let's go Mountaineers and that type of stuff. I know we're middle of the day, got a game in front, game behind. Just wanted to throw something up here, especially after the Bilal Marshall news. So if you don't catch this, feel free to comment on this video on the archive. Feel free to hit up WV Sports Now. Hit me up on Twitter. Talk to me there. Also, of course, I'll have other programs, Mic Drop, also Believe Network for where that show lives as well. Get me video, get me audio, get me anywhere else. You can call in a show that I'm appearing on or any other radio show that I may jump on and host. So find me other places you can do. Google search them all over. We can talk elsewhere about this too. If you can't do this now, I thought people maybe were still off work, so maybe this would be okay. But I've had live chats a lot more bumping than this one. But nonetheless, again, I'm going to move on from WVU football, which seems to just disappoint people. And I get, we'll see if a new year brings more, because it was a bad 2022 for WVU football. There's no bones about it. It was a rough year. The news hasn't been wonderful to West Virginia to this point, even closing 2022. We'll see 2023. This is the first piece of news for the new year. Bilal Marshall as receivers coach, not the flashy name that you guys wanted, nor I even advocated for, but he's done it. He's been doing it. He knows the staff. He's familiar with the program. That's all a plus for a position coach. And again, he might have that Florida pipeline that could be a really, really big deal, whether we're talking high school recruiting or in the transfer portal. So if that's all the case and that all works out, then maybe it'll be fine. If not, then everything will be, retooled and changed a year from now anyway, really. So if Brown is gone in a year, then everyone there could be gone in a year, which might be part of these assistants wanting more stability elsewhere. So we will see. But I do want to move on to Mountaineer hoops a little bit here and get some of that in. And a lot of this has to be proven. A lot of this has to be proven. But there's a reason why the computer system loved West Virginia so much. The voters loved West Virginia so much. Myself and many of my colleagues have loved West Virginia so much going into conference play. And obviously already dropping a game in conference play doesn't make you feel good. It's an overtime, but doesn't make you feel good. And you're going to face Kansas. You're going to face Baylor. You're going to face Texas. You're going to face Texas Tech. It is a gauntlet. It is a gauntlet in the Big 12. We're talking about quadrant 1 games here, all the way through. All the way through. My colleague Ethan Bach headlined a post about coming up Big 12 play as it being a gauntlet. And that's the word. That's the word I told him. Great word. That's it. It's a gauntlet. It really, really is. Toughest conference in the country. And West Virginia got through 2022 prior to conference play with a couple losses. The Xavier loss does still sting. All the taunting against Huggins, his first trip back there. They were the rival of Cincinnati when he's made his name. It's an out-of-conference game that could have been a nice win for you, even though Xavier is not as great as they've been before, which also makes the loss hurt more because that's kind of the best they've played all year. Lost to Purdue. That doesn't hurt you at all. They're a top team in the country. They weren't then. They've proven themselves now. Some of your wins have been proven to be better than they were at the time. You're blowing out Pitt in the backyard brawl on the road by almost 30 points. Pitt has since been a team flirting with the legitimacy here, and maybe they're going to get some ranked votes coming up. And they got a win over North Carolina, won 8 or 9 in a row. I mean, they're a team that could compete in the ACC. I'm not saying they're going to win the conference. I'm not even saying they're going to go to the NCAA, but they've certainly turned it around from a season ago when they were so bad, and they've been playing respectable basketball, to say the very, very least, with Nellie Cummings and company. And I'll plug our coverage over there at Pittsburgh Sports Now with George Michalowski and company there within the Sports Now network. But that's now a solid win for West Virginia. And yeah, John Ugley didn't play in that game, but still, I don't know if he would have made 25-point difference. In fact, if any debate exists on that, Jeff Capel, after the game, I was sitting there, he literally said, yeah, that was a hit to us, but it wouldn't have been a 25-point hit. We didn't play well enough. They're better. So, and West Virginia's played well since then. It's not like that was the peak of West Virginia this year. Obviously, Pitt has played way better, but Ugley wasn't going to be a 25-point difference. And Nellie Cummings fouled out with 7 minutes left. That's the Pitt imploded a little bit too. I don't know if they played again, it probably wouldn't be a 25-point game. But right now the resume stands, and they're not going to play again. It's a big win for West Virginia. It's a quality win for West Virginia. So the reason why so many of us were high on this West Virginia team, and you guys are still not, going into conference play, and it's a wait and see thing. They got to prove it. I get it. They got to prove it. If you're having problems with Kansas State, what are you going to do to Kansas? What are you going to do to Baylor? What's going to happen against Texas? Home and away. I get it. It's a problem. Last year, multiple 7-game losing streaks. You don't want to see that again. But everyone's saying, oh, same old Mountaineers, or again, you lose to Kansas State, so you can just drop all these games. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see multiple 7-game losing streaks again, and they're going to lose all the quality games to Kansas, Baylor, etc. They're not going to win any of those games, and they're somehow going to finish the year with 14 overall wins, barely getting any in 2023, and maybe win 1 or 2 conference games, something crazy like that. That's the prediction people are saying, or same old Mountaineers. Because while the basketball program has certainly been a solid one, to say the very least, whether we're talking historic or even in the last couple decades, and I'm talking within the last even 5 years, so it's not like it's been forever, as people sometimes rag on Huggins and say, what have you done with me lately, like Neil Brown? Well, Huggins has a track record, and also they had a tournament win a few years ago, and you want more than that. Obviously, that's not nearly the expectation. You should get Sweet 16s every now and then, if not more than not, from West Virginia. Last year, bad, not acceptable, really, really bad basketball. But this team is different. This team is literally different. It's not even just my opinion. Eric Stevenson was not on last year's team. Okay, they have players that were not on last year's team that are on this team. Huggins went into the portal and basically rebuilt the entire starting 5. Who knows if they're going to get Perez? They probably aren't at this point. But even if they don't, this is a much more athletic team. This team can shoot a lot better than last year's team. This team can rebound a lot better than last year's team. And they have rebounded well, including against Kansas State, even in the loss. Even in losses this year, they've still rebounded well. That's a big plus. That didn't happen last year. Huggins hates teams that can't rebound. They are rebounding this year. He's never satisfied with it and wants more from the rebounding touch of the team, but they still have rebounded relatively well most of this season. Trey Mitchell, still 8 weeks from surgery. Okay, get him healthy, get him fully healthy. He's been good, but get him fully healthy. Emmett Matthews, you see what happens when he's not there. Some could argue, and I've argued, that it's Eric Stevenson as the MVP and leader of this team, but some have argued maybe it's Matthews, and him not being there, the team played worse. They were different when he was out, and that was against lesser competition, but still, it was evident. So they have so many pieces that weren't there or are just better. And there's more to see. Again, Trey Mitchell getting healthier and this team playing together longer. And yeah, if this team had next year together as well, who knows what they could be. That's more chemistry, that's more development, that's more years under Hugs. It's not going to happen. Eric Stevenson is maxed out his eligibility, etc. You don't know if you ever see Jose Perez on the floor, because if he can't play this year, does he want to do it next year? But regardless, this team right now could still make a run. And I never would have said that last year. So last year, regardless of what the record was in December, and they got some wins against bad teams. They beat Pitt last year. They weren't good. Okay, they weren't playing well. And I know West Virginia and Huggins will tell you, well, we were beating teams because we were better, but we weren't still playing as well as we could. Of course, they weren't playing as well as they could have some points this season. Okay, there were issues. There were times in the middle of games where they're chucking way outside shots unnecessarily. They're missing layups. They're not playing mentally sound basketball that Huggins needs. I get it. And that's on them. That's on Hugs. That's all not acceptable when you're trying to do something special, but it's also team building. And they were very, very young and very, very, in terms of being together and trying to build that up. But last year, it was all of that and way, way worse. Way worse. The team, regardless of even if they won in the win, it's hard to remember any of them, honestly. They just weren't a good team last year. You could tell right away. Going into December, you could tell this team just sucks. This team's not going anywhere. This team's not going to be anything. Nobody was thinking this team was going anywhere. And maybe record-wise, you could argue it at the time, but the rankings weren't there. The computers weren't loving them nearly as much. They just weren't good. And then they proved it. Okay, they showed you they were bad. Even if this team disappoints and doesn't make some Sweet 16 or Elite 8 run, that, yeah, you should expect out of the West Virginia basketball program. that should be an expectation. It's been a while. You got to get one. Huggins is legit a Hall of Famer, obviously, but you got to get one. I hear that angst. I hear it. You can't have the season go in the tubes every year and then lose in the first game of the tournament or not get in the tournament, lose early in the Big 12 tournament. I get it. That's not going to be a standard any longer. The program set the standard to giving you more than that. But you're not going to have multiple 7-game losing streaks with this team. With this team, I mean, you got a big in Mo as well. I mean, this team has size. This team has athleticism. This team has a shooting touch. And this team loves playing for Coach Huggins and learning from him. They have a leader on the floor, an extension of the coach, and Eric Stevenson. That really wasn't the case last year. Last year's team was a collection of guys that had some talent that didn't fit together, didn't really want to be there. I don't think Huggins really liked that much early in the season. Prior to that, you're talking about McBride pretty much having to do it on his own offensively. And then a guy like Holford doing it on his own defensively. This is a group. This is a group together. So I do think they play better team basketball. I do think they're more athletic. I do think they're better shooters. I do think they're better offensively. I do think they're better on the glass. I do think they're even better defensively, even though that certainly needs improved. Foul trouble is a problem too. They do need to play smarter. I touched on that on the site. The whole bully ball mentality that Eric Stevenson and others have talked about. They want to bully and beat people up. They got to play within themselves. They got to control that because Huggins did bring it up then, and we saw it against Kansas State. That can get you into foul trouble. And if you get into foul trouble, the other team hits their shots, you miss your free throws, you got problems otherwise, you're turning over the basketball, it could be a disaster. So, yeah, it's a gauntlet in the Big 12. It is. It's a tough conference. You're going to get a lot of ranked opponents there. It is a tough conference. It's not like you're stacking out a conference to make it harder on yourself. You just got to tough in your conference. I get it. You get through it, though, they'll get a top 4 seed out of it. If they play respectable basketball all the way through, don't have to win them all, but if they win some, certainly if they're going to beat one of those good teams, but if they beat a couple, they win more than they lose in Big 12 play, they'll get a respectable C out of it, especially because of how much the computers love them right now. They were 24th ranked team in the country for a reason. And Kansas State, basically, they're getting some votes now. They should be ranked. I would have them ranked right now. Certainly off of beating West Virginia and being right there before. I think they have one loss, a 12-1 on the year. I mean, what the hell else they got to do? Schedule's not been as tough as even WVU's out of conference, but come on. I think at this point, they're a late-ranked team. So that would be another one that was a quality loss, even though you don't want to lose for West Virginia. But looking at the schedule coming up, these are some winnable games before you get into the gauntlet. You do have Kansas not too far from now on the 7th. So could West Virginia beat any of those really great teams at home or on the road in Big 12 play with this team? Yeah. Would I have said that last year? No, not at all. Is this team going to lose 7 in a row multiple times to close a year? No way. Okay. Are they going to lose 7 games multiple times? 7 games in a row, I don't see. They're going to lose some games you think they should have won. They're going to disappoint you at times. They're not going to run through everything. I'm not predicting a national title here by any means. There's still a team trying to get it together or even winning the conference. But are they going to lose 7 in a row? No, they're not that bad. There's more talent on this team, and they want to do it more. They care about Hugs more, and they play together more than last year to avoid that. So they've proven you that they're not going to do that. But do they need to hurry up and get some Big 12 wins and stack them before they get into the gauntlet? Because they know they're guaranteed to lose some games in conference play? Yeah, absolutely. I do see we got a comment here from DRPIV, not sure what those initials tell me, but was honestly much higher on the team 4 games ago. Something has been amiss starting in the Buffalo game, was evident for the full game against Stony Brook and for most of the game against Kansas State. So I'm not going to deny actually that, because yes, I was also higher in the team 4 games ago. There was a while earlier in the season where they're blowing teams out and they're not even playing their best. They're winning games by 30 points, and they're not even playing smart basketball. Huggins knows that everyone else knows it, and they even kind of know it. And it shows you the potential and how much talent is there, because they can basically win by 30 even when they weren't playing well. That's big. And yeah, you need to play better to beat better teams. That was clear. But again, Pitt and other teams that they did beat then have proven to be actually good clubs. But they have played a little off of themselves. I don't know if they're down about the Perez news, and that BS and bullshit, if I will tell you, because they've got transfers at Manhattan since then, by the way. A school trying to block a kid is crazy, but they've also added players. I don't know how that works. A lot of hypocrisy. at Manhattan. Anyway, I feel bad for the kid because it's not his fault. He had a coach fired 10 days before a season. Of course, he'd want to leave there. It's not like he's a Manhattan lifer. He wants to go move on. It doesn't matter where he went. He could choose to have gone to any other school. I'd feel the same way. It does not matter. That's crap. I don't know if that down the team or what, because they were expecting Perez to add that life into the team and ignite the team a little bit more. And obviously that's not happening and may not happen at all now into January, and the news looking bleak. Regardless, though, yeah, they played a little lackadaisical. I also think, though, to defend the team there in terms of those 4 games, you're looking at 2 of them without Emmett Matthews. So it's really showing you how important he is on the floor. He's very important to this team. We could argue all day on who's the leader of the MVP between Stevenson and Matthews. I could argue, to compromise here, that Stevenson's the team leader as the extension of the coach, and the coach goes to Stevenson first and explains things to him. He then conveys it to the team. He talks in the press conference. He's the most vocal. He's teaching guys up in practice from what we've seen. Eric Stevenson is the leader of the team, but Matthews might be the MVP. He might be the heart of the team. So him not being there in those games might be why the team looked worse in those games. But yeah, Stony Brook in particular, Buffalo, they did not really play well. And if they were playing Kansas in those games, if they were playing Texas in those games, they might have lost by 20 to those elite programs. And that would obviously be a pretty black eye on your resume. I get it. They beat teams they should beat, and maybe not as convincingly as you'd want them to have beaten those teams. I get it. But they lost in overtime as well to Kansas State. It's not like they got blown out. It's not like it was a really bad game. They lost in overtime when they made boneheaded mistakes, and they also did not get calls from referees. But Huggins brought that up too. Let's complain all day, but you're not going to get calls. West Virginia is not going to get calls in conference play. So if you know that, you got to play within yourself, and you can't make it easier on the referees to take the calls away. And I'm not arguing any conspiracy theory here, but they're just not going to get the calls. So if that's the case, you're not going to get any home cooking that say Kansas maybe would get up for any bump in terms of a referee call. You can't make it easier on them. And they kind of did against Kansas State. They played dumb basketball. And Eric Stevenson was cold early. I mean, is that all going to happen again? Are you going to have a player like Eric Stevenson play like that again? Is that going to be the output again? I don't think so. So again, there's reason to believe they're going to play better moving on. There is 100%. Do they need to? And fast? 100%. They need wins. They need a conference win before Kansas. 100%. 100%. You don't want to just have an offer in a donut hole there going into a Kansas game in conference play, several games into conference play. No. Critical for West Virginia to get a conference win prior to Kansas, for sure. Can they? Have they shown reason to believe they can? Yeah. Are they good? And there's reason to believe the computers should have liked them to rank them when they did. They were flirting with rankings even before that point. Do they only really have one bad loss on the whole season? They have 3 overall. The Xavier loss is the only one that's really funky, but you got 2 overtime losses, Xavier and Kansas State, and then Purdue, top team. So again, or any of them bad? Maybe not, but we'll see the rest of conference play. If they're dropping Oklahoma State, if they're dropping games, if they're losing to Kansas by 15 points instead of being competitive, or you got to beat some of those teams. They got to win maybe home or away against some of those elite teams. They got to win some, obviously. Then yeah, you're all right. And I was too high in the team, and they're the same old team. But even if they do that this year, it's not like last year. It's not blaming last year for this year, saying it's same old Mountaineers. This is the same. This is different. This is not the same. This is a different group. This is a different team. This is a team that's built differently. They play differently. They have a different mentality than last year. So if it happens again this year where they lose a bunch in a row, yeah, that is unacceptable basketball. Huggins isn't going to accept it either. He'll be throwing chairs and putting people on treadmills, but I don't think it connects at all to last year. But there's still tons of reason to believe this team is going to be better than last season. They played better than last season to this point. Last year to this point, they were way worse than they are right now. I mean, that's just the case. But do they need to get some real quick? 100%. 100%. Again, Mike Asti here, WVU Sports Now, wrapping up a Mountaineer live chat. Did get some chatting action. Random day, random time. I get it. I'll do more of these in the midst of my show and what else we got going on throughout the network. Anything else, though? I do see several of you are still watching along here and give me a lot of Let's Go Mountaineers, any of that action there in the chat. So anything else in terms of comments, whether it be on the football team, the basketball team, they do bring in Bilal Marshall. I think that's a lot more for Florida recruiting and a guy who has been a coach. The other stars that you wanted haven't really done it. They don't have a recruiting touch. And then the hoops team, they got to get a win. They got to get a win. They got to have a conference win before Kansas, but they could still beat those teams. They could. There's no reason to believe they couldn't beat those teams. These are big games, obviously. The team playing well this year overall. Have they not played to their potential? Yes. I 100% believe they haven't played to their potential. But will we maybe never see it? That's possible too, because the season only has a few more months left in it, obviously. And you only have 1 year. It's not going to be like the old days where you can build chemistry and then return the next year and, oh, here's us. Because Eric Stevenson, already the team leader, he won't be there. And who knows about Perez and others that you're hoping for this year. He may never play as a Mountaineer. So I get the disappointment. I get being higher on the team a few games ago. That also was probably prior to the Perez news coming down. There's a reason to believe, okay, they're going to start losing conference games. They're not going to get Perez. We're looking at a tournament berth, the 8-9 seed at best, and losing right away. That's probably where your head is right now. They're get in, unlike last year. They're better than last year, but they're not that good. I do think there's reason to believe they're much better. They can still be a 5, 6, 4 seed. They can beat these teams. We'll see if it happens, though. They need to prove it. They need to do it. They need to start getting some because the record is going to matter. Your resume is going to matter. And even though these are all quality quadrant 1 losses, if you would lose these games, you got to get to a certain win total, too. You probably got to get 17, 18 games in the win column, or you're not getting in the tournament. Okay, 18 is really where you want to be, if not more. You got to get to a certain amount of wins, regardless of conference play, regardless of the conference tournament, regardless of how hard the conference is, regardless of the gauntlet coming up. You can't have 14 wins and say they're all quadrant 1 losses and we got to get in anyway. It's not going to happen. So they got to get enough wins. They got to. And we'll see. There's plenty of quality wins coming up on this resume, coming up on this schedule, but they're also not going to be easy games, and they got to do a lot to get through some of those. Again, I guess that'll do it if there's nothing else there. Again, WV Sports Now on Twitter, on Facebook. Also, of course, WVSportsNow.com for the site. At MikeGossi11 for me on Twitter. And hope I was able to make some sense of things. Certainly the West Virginia football hire, Bilal Marshall. Hopefully I'm also pronouncing his name correctly. I looked and heard from some others. That's what we're going with. Bilal Marshall. But he's been there before. He's recruited Florida before. He still recruits Florida. He's going to recruit more of Florida. He kind of was doing Florida before, whether he was getting credit or not. And the other, Stedman Bailey, Ryan Switzer, maybe in a few years, maybe when they got to probably coach somewhere else and then get the job at West Virginia. It's a major program. It's a Power 5 major program. To jump in when you never coached before, I don't care if you're a former player or not, that might have been a lot, honestly. Again, Bilal Marshall coached the VMI for a year. If you don't have the VMI season, are they hiring him? Probably not. You don't have a grad assistant run for the other two. And when you make that much money and you're in the NFL and you have the name recognition that Stedman Bailey or Ryan Switzer has, you're not going to be a grad assistant. They're not going to come in. They're not going to humble themselves and be a grad assistant somewhere. I cannot see it. So they're going to try to get another title that maybe is lower than receiver coach because they don't want to be a grad assistant with their name recognition. But obviously, if you're Bilal Marshall, you don't care. You do whatever. You're building it up. You're trying to be a coach. You're done with the NFL or CFL or whatever it was. So that's different. He can be humbled. He can take a position. The other guys were not going to take some intern. I saw people putting that out there. We'll bring in Ryan Switzer as a grad assistant or make Stedman Bailey a coach intern. And then if he does well, then you pay him. Like, what the hell? These guys are not going to come in to not get paid, to be there for a while, to have embarrassing titles based on what their resume was. You're not going to bring in one of the better receivers in program history, make him an intern and not pay the guy. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And I get, okay, he has no coaching resume, so if you want to be a coach, you go take whatever is offered to you. But they can get jobs, and Ryan Switzer in particular can get an assistant job, a coaching job with a title, with money elsewhere. So if you want him, you're going to have to give it to him. But I don't know if the Mountaineers, West Virginia, the 15th winningest program ever, despite, it's down 3 out of 4 losing seasons. Still, though, and there's pressure to win now, I don't know if that program is your first job. Even as a position coach. I don't think so. So they went with a guy that has coaching experience, has a Florida pipeline. They don't have any recruiting pipeline. Bailey and Switzer, there's no recruiting pipeline there. So I kind of get the move now, honestly, when you dive in. And this basketball team needs to prove themselves. They do. I've been high on them. I'm not always high on teams. I just tell you what it is. They're way better than last year, but they got to prove it. The record got to be better. They got to get in the tournament. They got to win a game. They got to prove what people are saying and what your eyes tell you, and even what the numbers say. They got to prove it and get some big wins to do it in conference play, or it won't matter. And even though the team's totally built differently and it'll be different than last year, if they don't get it done, people will be able to say same old Mountaineers, even though it's not. Nonetheless, though, this has been another edition of Mountaineer Live Chat, or whatever it was, here on WV Sports Now. Again, subscribe, follow, bottom of the video. There's a button there. Hit subscribe. Easy, free to do so. Maybe we'll send you some merch if you comment that maybe you want some of that. We got some merch now. Don't have it on right now. Obviously, this is blank, but we got some merch you've seen in past videos. We got some t-shirts, hoodies, hats. It's all out there, even throughout sports now. So hit us up. We'll get you some gear, and we'll be talking soon. I do promise more of these.